He's in a halfway house. He's in a halfway house now.
How did Michael Madsen, the man with the coldest stare in Hollywood, take his final bow? On the morning of July 3rd, 2025, the sun rose quietly over Malibu. Inside a modest house overlooking the Pacific, deputies answered a 911 call. When they arrived, they found the star of Reservoir Dogs and Kill Bill lying still. No cameras, no audience, no soundtrack, only the echo of silence that follows a life spent on the edge. For decades, Madsen had been the embodiment of danger. He was the man audiences feared but couldn't look away from, a born outlaw whose smirk carried both menace and melancholy. Yet behind that violent screen persona was a father of 6, a poet, and a survivor who had lived through more heartbreak than any role could ever capture. That morning, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department would confirm the news no one wanted to believe. Michael Madsen was gone at 67. His representative said simply, "We understand Michael had a cardiac arrest, but those who knew him best understood there was more to it. Years of battles with alcohol, grief that never healed, and a body worn down by the same intensity that made him famous." Before his death, he had told friends he was finally ready for a new chapter. He was finishing a book of poems, words about fathers, forgiveness, and the cost of being a man in Hollywood. That chapter would never be written. Michael Madsen's story began in the streets of Chicago and ended in quiet Malibu. Yet between those two worlds, he carved a path that few dared to walk, a life lit by violence, loyalty, and unspoken pain. But to understand the man who died alone that morning, we have to return to where it all began. Michael Søren Madsen was born on September 25th, 1957, in the industrial heartbeat of Chicago. His father, Calvin, was a firefighter, a man of few words and strong hands, while his mother, Elaine, was a woman of words and imagination, who would later win an Emmy for a documentary about filmmaking. The two divorced when Michael was just a boy, leaving him to grow up between two worlds: the discipline of a firehouse and the dreams of a writer. He wasn't born into privilege. His teenage years were marked by trouble, street fights, stolen cars, and a few days behind bars. He once admitted, "I wasn't a bad kid. I was just trying to survive Chicago." But even then, there was a spark, that raw energy that would one day become his signature intensity on screen. Before he ever held a film script, Madsen held a wrench. He worked as a mechanic in Beverly Hills, fixing the cars of people whose lives seemed impossibly far from his own. Fred Astaire, Jack Lemmon, Warren Beatty. He had grease under his nails and ambition in his eyes. He would later say, "I wasn't chasing fame. I just wanted to find something that made sense." The turning point came when he saw Robert Mitchum in the 1957 war film Heaven Knows, Mr. Allison. Madsen was struck by the actor's quiet strength. "That was it," he recalled. "I thought, maybe I can do that." He joined Chicago's Steppenwolf Theater Company, where he learned the craft under the shadow of John Malkovich. In one play, Of Mice and Men, he played Carlson, the ranch hand who kills a dog. Years later, Madsen would laugh about it, saying the dog was his best acting teacher. "If I wasn't in the moment, the dog didn't believe me." By 1982, he'd moved to Los Angeles. He landed small television roles, Street Elsewhere, Miami Vice, Cagney, and Lacey. He wasn't a star yet, but his face stuck in people's minds. The kind of man who could look dangerous, even while standing still. That mix of menace and melancholy would soon find its perfect home in the world of Quentin Tarantino. In 1992, a young video store clerk turned screenwriter named Quentin Tarantino was about to make his first feature film. The script was Reservoir Dogs, a brutal, dialogue-driven heist story with no heroes, only criminals, betrayal, and blood. When Tarantino met Michael Madsen, he found exactly what he'd been looking for: danger wrapped in charm. At first, Madsen wanted the role of Mr. Pink, the fast-talking thief later played by Steve Buscemi. But Tarantino saw something else in him. "You're not Mr. Pink," he told Madsen. "You're Mr. Blonde." The role was Vic Vega, a psychotic, smiling hitman whose calm brutality would redefine violence on screen. When Reservoir Dogs premiered, one scene changed everything. Mr. Blonde dances to Stuck in the Middle with You while torturing a cop, slicing off his ear with a razor. The violence was shocking, but the rhythm, the playful sadism was unforgettable. That was Michael Madsen. Cool, cold, completely unpredictable. He later revealed that filming the scene was harder than anyone imagined. "I actually walked out," he said. "I didn't want to finish it. It felt too real." But Tarantino convinced him to come back and the scene became legend. Reservoir Dogs catapulted Madsen into Hollywood's spotlight. Overnight, he was the new face of cinematic menace, the man who could make evil seem almost human. Critics compared him to Robert Mitchum, Lee Marvin, and Clint Eastwood. He called himself a blue-collar actor in a white-collar town. The collaboration with Tarantino also built something more than just a career. It built a brotherhood. Though they would clash years later over roles and egos. Madsen always said, "I'd have been dead and buried long ago without Quentin." When the film ended with a hail of gunfire, it felt prophetic, the beginning of a career that would be as explosive and chaotic as the final moments of the movie itself. From that point forward, Michael Madsen was no longer just another working actor. He was Hollywood's outlaw, the man audiences loved to fear, and Quentin Tarantino wasn't finished with him yet. After Reservoir Dogs, Michael Madsen became the man every director wanted when they needed danger that felt real. He wasn't acting, he was living it. His voice, gravelly and low, his stare heavy with unspoken history, made him the perfect outlaw for the big screen. But it was Quentin Tarantino who continued to shape his legacy. Tarantino called again a decade later with a new vision, Kill Bill. The role was Bud, the fallen assassin turned strip club bouncer, living in the desert with regret and whiskey as his only company. Bud was the quiet brother of Bill, the kind of man who once wielded power but now swept floors. In Madsen's hands, Bud became more than a villain. He was a man broken by his own sins. His death scene, buried alive by the bride, remains one of the most haunting moments in the saga. He would later reunite with Tarantino again in The Hateful Eight as Joe Gage, the mysterious cowboy who poisons coffee in a snowbound cabin. And then came Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he appeared as Sheriff Hackett in the show within a show Bounty Law. Each time, his screen time might have been brief, but his presence lingered, the kind of actor who left fingerprints on every frame. Beyond Tarantino, Madsen's filmography sprawled across genres. The heroic dolphin trainer's friend in Free Willy, 1993. The menacing mobster in Donnie Brasco, 1997. The weary detective in Mulholland Falls, and even the charming romantic in Thelma and Louise, 1991. By the 2000s, he had appeared in over 300 productions, feature films, indie thrillers, direct-to-video crime flicks, and even video games like Grand Theft Auto 3 and Dishonored. When asked why he took on so many projects, Madsen answered with brutal honesty. "Sometimes people forget that actors have mortgages too. You take a film you probably shouldn't, and then you live with it." He wasn't chasing awards. He was chasing survival. For every hit, there were 10 flops, but he never stopped working, never stopped showing up on set. That relentless energy was both his gift and his curse. Behind the camera, though, a storm was brewing, one that fame, loyalty, or even Tarantino couldn't save him from. Behind the swagger and the Hollywood myth, Michael Madsen's life was unraveling. Fame had brought him money, recognition, and endless film offers, but also chaos. He had built a reputation for living exactly like the characters he played. Reckless, loyal, unpredictable. For years, that edge made him magnetic. Eventually, it became a burden he couldn't escape. By the early 2000s, the roles grew smaller, the paychecks lighter, and the personal demons louder. Madsen had been through 3 marriages, the last, to actress Deanna Morgan, whom he married in 1996 while filming Donnie Brasco. Together they had 3 sons, Hudson, Calvin, and Luke. He also had 3 older children from previous relationships. He loved them deeply but struggled to be present. Work was constant. The bottle, even more so. He was arrested several times for driving under the influence, once in 2012, again in 2019. Each time, the tabloids dragged him through the mud, calling him the fallen Tarantino star. But those close to him said the man they knew was gentle, generous, and haunted. He poured his turmoil into poetry, late-night verses scribbled on motel napkins and film call sheets. Then came the blow that shattered him. In January 2022, his son Hudson, a 26-year-old U.S. Army sergeant, took his own in Hawaii. It broke Michael completely. He told reporters, "I can't understand it. He was my firstborn, my boy." After Hudson's death, Madsen spiraled. A month later, he was arrested for trespassing in Malibu. Later that year, he filed for divorce. Friends described him as living in slow motion, sober one week, drinking the next, writing poems he would never finish. Still, he tried to work. He filmed small, independent projects, often accepting roles just to stay occupied. He spoke about wanting to change, to find peace. In his final interviews, he talked about his upcoming book, Tears for My Father, Outlaw Thoughts and Poems, and how it would be his way of making sense of everything. But that redemption arc, the one Hollywood always promises, never came. By the summer of 2025, his body had grown frail, and his heart had already carried too much pain. And then, on that quiet July morning in Malibu, it finally gave out. In the final months of his life, Michael Madsen seemed to be slowing down, but not giving up. Friends said he was calmer, more reflective, and surprisingly hopeful. He had stopped chasing roles and started revisiting the past old scripts, old letters, old photographs. He talked about a new beginning, a book of poetry that would reveal the side of him few had ever seen. "I'm finally ready for the next chapter," he told his manager. No one imagined that chapter would never be written. On the morning of July 3rd, 2025, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department received a 911 call from Madsen's Malibu home. Deputies arrived at around 8 in the morning and found the actor unresponsive. He was pronounced dead at 8:25 a.m. at the scene. The representative for Madsen's agency, EMR Media Entertainment, later confirmed, "We understand Michael had a cardiac arrest." At first, details were scarce. The Hollywood Reporter broke the news later that day, calling him the rough-and-tumble actor whose intensity became Tarantino's trademark. The Guardian followed with a detailed obituary, describing his death as a heart attack and reflecting on his lifelong struggle between violence and vulnerability. But 2 weeks later, People magazine obtained the official death certificate. It revealed the precise cause: cardiac arrest due to cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease, with chronic alcoholism as a contributing condition. It also noted a thromboembolism, a blood clot that can block arteries, silent and deadly. No autopsy was performed. Madsen's cardiologist signed the certificate, and the LA County Police closed the case, ruling it a natural death. He died alone in his Malibu home, the same place where he had spent his final years writing, reflecting, and mourning his son. There were no signs of distress, no chaos, no violence. Just a man whose heart, both literally and metaphorically, had finally stopped fighting. For an actor who built his life around intensity, guns, blood, and fury, it was an oddly peaceful end. In a town where most outlaws go out loud, Michael Madsen went quietly. And yet, Hollywood wasn't quiet for long. The tributes began almost immediately. Michael Madsen left behind more than 340 films, dozens of poems, and a legend carved into the darker corners of American cinema. To some, he was the face of violence, the man who made cruelty look poetic. To others, he was a working-class hero, a reminder that not every actor in Hollywood wears a smile or a tuxedo. He never chased fame, and he never apologized for being himself. His art came from the same place as his pain, raw, unpolished, and real. That honesty made him unforgettable. Whether he was cutting off an ear in Reservoir Dogs, staring down Uma Thurman in Kill Bill, or pouring his heart into a late-night poem, Madsen brought the same truth: the beauty and the burden of being human. Critics once said his career was uneven, but perhaps that was the point. His life was never about perfection, it was about presence. He showed up, no matter how bruised or broken. Now, long after the lights fade and the credits roll, one thing remains clear. Michael Madsen didn't just play the outlaw. He was the outlaw one who lived by his own rules until the very end. From the firehouses of Chicago to the hills of Malibu, Michael Madsen lived a life that burned with intensity and ended in silence. He was the man behind 1,000 dangerous stares, but also a father, a poet, and a soul that never stopped searching for peace. His final chapter reminds us that behind every Hollywood legend is a human being, fragile and fleeting. If his story moved you, share his name, remember his art, and subscribe for more true Hollywood stories where every light hides a shadow and every legend leaves an echo.